I probably have too many slides, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I think we really want to hear from our key speakers today. But we all know what TOD is, and it's also important to remember what TOD is not, and that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and does take a lot of proactive and thoughtful thinking and planning about each station area being distinct and unique, both in what it is and the number of activities and strategies that it takes to realize the vision for TOD at each station. It's really important to think about the different scales of TOD, and today the scale at which we're talking is the corridor scale. So there's the regional scale, and we're really fortunate to have the fast-track system, but we need to think about the relationship between all of those corridors that comprise the system. From the region, we have the corridors, then the station area, and the individual parcels, which are where the development activities occur. But why is the corridor scale significant? These are the segments that define the entire system, and the stations along that transit corridor support diverse and complementary uses. The connections between the station areas are the ones that really strengthen the transit, that create the ridership and create the types of places that we want to be able to live in, to access for our jobs, to access for services, education, and other means. But it's really about creating effective integrated corridor level planning that encourages the momentum of market activity between the different station areas and augmenting the access to different development opportunities. So what are the benefits of corridor planning? It's about integrating regional and the local context and development opportunities. Corridor planning can create a broader, more robust momentum around market activity and thus TOD implementation. It increases efficiency by coordinating the land use relationships between the different station areas, the regional cooperation that can occur, and it's really about explaining all of the different roles in the station areas that make up the collective corridor. So when we think about a corridor, it's really connecting the dots. It's these different station areas that comprise all of the unique attributes. So one station area may be more heavily focused on office and commercial uses, another on residential, other on a mix, and others on residential. And we try to think about three different types of corridors: destination connectors, commuter corridors, and district circulators. The type of transit corridor has different implications for the type of planning and implementation activities. So thinking about the different corridors can really help a jurisdiction think about the type of investment decisions and the type of development they want to direct to the different station areas, and the mix of development, whether one area is more predominantly residential, predominantly commercial, or more of a mix of uses. And in this age of dwindling and tight resources, it really helps jurisdictions think about strategic public investments that need to be made, whether it's streetscaping, new utilities, or even public housing. The destination connector corridor is really a corridor that links together a whole diverse set of different destinations. The classic example is the Roslyn-Ballston corridor in the Washington, D.C. area. In Denver, the Future West corridor is really envisioned as a destination corridor, and the transit technology could either be light rail, any kind of fixed guideway, as well as bus rapid transit. And the implications for TOD and the destination connector corridor are demand for new development of all kinds around the different types of station areas, attracting higher density development overall because of the diverse linkage of station areas, and really making sure that you've got adequate bike and ped improvements around those activity centers to support the transit as well as the development activity. Commuter corridors are more focused on high peak commute areas. In the Denver area, the Southwest Corridor is a really good example, linking the Central Business District in downtown Denver with Inglewood and Littleton. And the technology can be commuter rail, any type of fixed guideway, really heavy rail or light rail. And the implications for TOD in the commuter corridor are more residential in nature because it's really the corridor that folks are accessing to get to the Central Business District in places of employment or entertainment, such as downtown Denver. And typically, the commuter corridor starts off with more heavily focused on park and rides that can eventually evolve to more land use intensity. The district circulator is really something that's used as a circulator for shorter commutes. So the 16th Street Mall in Denver is a great example, and the Portland streetcar is the one that's most touted as an example of a successful district circulator. The streetcar, light rail, or high-frequency bus service. I'm actually going to skip these because we really want to go into a couple of quick case studies, and then we're going to have Buzz speak. But the first is the Central Corridor in the Twin Cities. It's a corridor that's under construction connecting downtown St. Paul with downtown Minneapolis. And the leaders in the Twin Cities really came together to think about the corridor together and collectively, and recognized that when the corridor opened in 2012, that there needed to be some collective strategic investments on how they can be more proactive in catalyzing development around their transit stations. So the cities had done station area plans for the 18 station areas. Together, those investments that were needed to support TOD were $6.3 billion. So in a time of scant resources, they wanted to be more mindful about how they directed their resources and work more strongly with the development community and really start to promote some of those station areas where they wanted to have higher density market rate residential, more mixed income, and some affordable housing. So the corridor level analysis really looked at each of the station areas and all of the supportive supportive investments that were needed, from streetscape improvements, public art, utilities, new roads, and started to strategize on where those investments needed to be made. And then I want to jump to the West Corridor, which Mayor Murphy, I don't want to steal his thunder because he has a lot of information to share on that, but the city of Lakewood and Denver have done station area plans for all of those station areas along the West Corridor. And the outcome of that was over, I think, 4 million square feet of desired commercial space, about over 2,000 units of residential units, and a couple, just 1 million square feet of retail. Now, the likelihood of that happening at one time over the next 10 years is pretty unrealistic. So a strategy was put together for implementation along that corridor that looked at all of the station areas, kind of from the parcel size, the amount of the underutilized land, the proximity to the major activity centers, and the availability of other community facilities such as grocery stores, daycare centers, and other types of amenities, and came up with 3 different types of station areas: transformational, neighborhood infill, and intensification. And each of those 3 station areas have a very defined set of implementation activities. So, and those activities will really support the local jurisdictions and the housing authorities think about, as they move forward, how they can move their station area plans to reality. There was a development assessment that was conducted with developers in the region to address some of the perceptions and their thoughts on the West Corridor and at what time in the market they saw either market rate residential, for sale or rental, and commercial activities occurring in the West Corridor. And talking to the developers and creating the assessment really did highlight the needs to work with the cities to think more about not just the development, but the other supporting amenities that were needed around the station area. A couple strong stations, strong market stations filter to the top. And looking at the entire corridor context, we were able to recognize, and as I think were the West Corridor partners, that having 2 or 3 strong stations really benefits the entire corridor, and the weaker market stations would come along at a slower pace and still benefit from having access to some of the stronger market stations. The other finding along the West Corridor is the need to have a much more strong and cohesive brand and identity for the corridor. I don't think most folks really know where the West Corridor is unless you are somebody who works in transit or is a professed transit wonk. That really kind of branding that corridor and starting to promote it, not just to the development community, but also to the folks who live and reside in the corridor, that some, the residents in the Denver area didn't really understand the access that they were going to be provided to the stations in the Lakewood area. So quickly in closing, all scales of planning for TOD are critical, whether it's the region, the corridor, the station, or even the individual site. Corridor planning starts when a new transit investment is being proposed, and some of our corridors in the Denver region are further along than others. Corridor planning really presents an opportunity to engage all the stakeholders, so whether it's the elected officials, the local planners and engineers, and the development and investment community, as well as the folks living and residing who will eventually going to use the transit. And corridor planning is the most effective when it involves everyone in all of the station areas to really kind of broaden their thinking and think about a more robust context than instead of the individual and parochial station areas. So it's a significant role that we all play to making a successful transit region and ultimately a fast-track system that is accessible to everyone. The technology